on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Now you owe me.
And hello, I'm your host, Darren Hyman. Of course, you're watching the one and only interactive talk show bringing the Bronx and the rest of the world right to you. First up, we'll give you a breakdown of some major international headlines. Plus, Senator Gustavo Rivera is rallying his colleagues to put a stop to a law that is impossible legislation. It's the Stand Your Ground law in the wake of the Trayvon Martin case. Also, New York City's health department has launched an initiative providing Bronx teens with access to adequate health resources. And finally, a Bronx school is putting together a one-of-a-kind trip for several of its students, giving them the chance to do something most have never done before. That's visit a college campus. Stay tuned because all this and much more is heading your way, because right now we're officially open. And hello, Bronxites. I'm your host, Darren Hyman. Today is Wednesday, April the 4th. You're watching Open, the only live and interactive program bringing the Bronx and New York straight to your TV set. We encourage you to feel free to give us a call at 718-960-7241. Or as always, you can send us an email to open@bronxnet.org. We also want to let you know that we are socially networking and socially active. Hit us up on our Facebook by searching under Open, BronxNet Television, and Twitter by following our page at BronxNet TV. And also, you can watch us right from your website at www.bronxnet.org. Well, kicking things off today, President Obama is confident that the United States Supreme Court will not overturn his health care law. The Supreme Court is deciding whether to strike part or all of the law, especially a part of the bill that all Americans must carry insurance or pay a fine. With us now to break down this story, as well as the Syrian crisis and Arab Spring, is lawyer, political correspondent, and SUNY Maritime professor Mark Myritz, and we welcome you now to the show, and good to have you.
Hi, Darren. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. As we talk about President Obama, obviously he's got some things to deal with front and center, but first let's talk about the Republican nomination. Mitt Romney looking like a big winner yesterday.
Yeah, he won the primaries in D.C., Maryland, and Wisconsin. He now has 646 delegates out of 1,144, and Santorum has 272 delegates. Newt Gingrich has 135 delegates and Ron Paul has 51 delegates. So it looks like mathematically, strategically, it looks like Romney has got it sewn up. But Santorum's still in the race, and Newt is sort of still in the race, and Ron Paul is definitely still in the race.
Well, it seems like all of them are still in the race,
That's
even though.
right.
But let's talk about this. What does this actually do for the Romney campaign?
I think the Republican Party is in chaos, and it's in big trouble, because Romney has not identified himself in a way that the voters can understand what he's about. He made a comment the other day. He wants to show that he's a regular person and not just a billionaire or a millionaire, whatever he is, and said that he was in a hotel and he needed a shirt, but the shirt wasn't clean, so he washed it out and hung it up. Or the comment that he made about NASCAR, they asked about NASCAR, he says, I know a lot of owners of NASCAR, and I know this one and that one. He has no identification to the voters, and I think it's really a big problem. Santorum is well identified. I mean, of course, he's not going to win the nomination, but people understand where he's coming from, what kind of a person he is, and people don't have that similar idea about Romney. So I think that right now, President Obama, who is now on the offense against Romney, is, I think, pretty much unbeatable, but you never know. Politics is very
Well, let me ask you this
difficult.
question. A Romney-Santorum ticket possible?
I don't see it because, well, it is true that President Obama pulled Hillary Clinton into his administration as Secretary of State. So, there are, strange bedfellows do occur. But I think that What Romney need, well, maybe, but I think they might have a lot of personal antipathy and personal dislike because they really are hurting.
Well, Hillary and President Obama
They
had a lot
did.
of that going through too, but
the Clintons are quite unique and quite malleable in our politics. They are the true chameleons of politics. Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton. Now Bill is talking about Hillary running for president. They're the malleable and flexible politicians. Santorum is really a true believer. He believes in what he says. I know that's very surprising in politics in the United States, but I just don't know if it's compatible. I just don't know whether the far right will accept a Romney with a Santorum or without a Santorum.
It was talked about in the lead and talking about President Obama's health care bill going before the Supreme Court, the question as to whether or not.
Yes.
Where do we see this really playing out?
Well, what the president did was sort of unprecedented and very surprising by getting up and criticizing the court, really, and warning the court that the court has to affirm his health care program. When he did the State of the Union, he had 6 of the justices sitting there, and he criticized the court for the Citizens United case. Now, the Citizens United case is the one that opened up the floodgates of contributions and allowed multimillionaires to pour unlimited money into the campaign. So it's a controversial decision, but that a president stands up and criticizes the court and now basically says to the court, you'd better affirm my, not that he expects it to be affirmed, but I'm not saying he used very strong language. And that really is a question of our checks and balances and separation of powers. Andrew Jackson did that with the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court said you can't remove the Native Americans in Georgia, and Jackson said, I don't care what the Supreme Court says. So that's really the far extent of it. But Obama's sort of maybe at the borderline there, where his criticism is a little bit perhaps too strong in a system that we believe in, after Marbury versus Madison, that the Supreme Court has the right to do judicial review. That's their job.
And the GOP argues bullying. GOP argues bullying.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's an accurate description of what we have here. What we have here is the question is that the individual mandate is the crux of President Obama's reelection, in a sense. And he's worried that if the thing gets overturned in June, it's going to look very bad for him. Okay? And the ramification, we had 6+ hours of discussion at the Supreme Court. Some of the most interesting discussion about our politics, about our history, about our system, and showed also that in America we debate our issues in this forum and we don't debate it on the streets with troops and tanks as in Syria, for example. We debate it in the court decides, but the court's decision is the law. That's been the rule since the beginning of our republic. So for the president to make that statement, I think it's a little controversial, and it's pushing the line, I think, I believe.
You mentioned Syria. Bring us up to date on the latest in Syria.
Well, the situation in Syria is a horrendous situation. We have about 9,000 casualties so far and about 20,000 refugees that have escaped to Turkey. And there is an envoy of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, that is working out a plan with the Syrians to have them pull back their troops from the cities and stop killing the civilians. But the problem is, in the United Nations, when this came up, China and Russia vetoed any action by the United Nations. So as much as Turkey and other countries are trying to do something about the carnage in Syria, they can't do it. And why is that? Because it's international politics. Just this week, a Russian destroyer went from Russia through the Bosporus to visit a port in Syria. This is ratcheting up in a very scary situation where you have a hotbed of potential international conflict, and Iran is involved as well. And where Iran is involved, world stability is involved. Nuclear Iran, Russian destroyers, Syrians killing their people. You have the potential for world disaster, actually.
What do you think about the UN plan with Syria?
Right. Well, it looks like the Syrians have not even followed the initial promises that they made. If the UN plan were implemented, it has a potential for stabilizing the situation. But in the long run, what happens to Syria? Does Assad stay in power? Does he continue the repression of the people? And understand the fact that Assad represents a small minority of people in Syria, which is basically the Alawites, and that's a small sect. And the large majority of the people are Sunni, and they've been repressed. even so that the Hafez, the father, bombed, if you remember, some years ago, bombed the city and killed people with chemical weapons, and now similar carnage is occurring. What's the long-range plan? Is Assad going to stay? Well, the fact of the matter is that the rebels in Syria don't have heavy weapons, don't have sufficient armament, and the Syrian army is formidable. It has weapons, it has armaments, which, by the way, it's getting from Iran, resupplies from Iran. So how does a rebel group of disparate rebels that are all different kind of melange, mixed together, fight a huge, formidable, organized army like Syria that's well trained? It's impossible. There's no way they're going to do it. And the US and Turkey have said that they don't believe that there should be military intervention or even supplying those rebels with heavy armament. So then how do you resolve the situation? And what's the pressure on Syria, on Assad, to conform to the UN plan when he knows China and Russia and Iran are against it, and China and Russia have a veto in the Security Council? So he has no incentive. He might do that in the short run to stabilize the situation, but in the long run, does he remain? Now, it's possible that the regime itself, the Alawites, will get rid of Assad and put another leader in and stabilize the situation. That might happen. That's possible. As in Egypt, when Mubarak got thrown under the bus, so they might throw Assad under the bus just to calm it down. But long range, Iran is growing in power. Russia, China, Syria, it's a chess game with mortally dangerous implications for world peace.
Let me move along just for a quick second to talk about the Arab Spring. Give us the latest.
Well, the Arab Spring is sort of turning into either a fall or a winter. It's not as springy as we thought it would be. In Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, which had announced that it would not participate in the presidential elections, has now said that they're going to field a candidate for president, which means that they've already won parliamentary elections, that they want to take power in Egypt. This has consequences for the peace in the region, because one of the things that they've said is that they don't agree with the peace treaty with Israel. The peace treaty with Israel, for better or for worse, kept that border quiet for all these years. And the Muslim Brotherhood is also very powerful in Syria. So what you have is the potential is that the Muslim Brotherhood will come to power in all these countries and change the equation. And that will be very detrimental to U.S. interests and also to peace and stability in the region, because we really don't know. The brothers have said many different things about where they stand. Are they pragmatic? Do they want to follow the Turkish model and be more secular and create a secular Islamic state? Or the worry is that they want to create an Iranian-style state, which is a theological state. That would be very, very dangerous, because then you would have an encirclement of the entire area with these regimes under the tutelage and power of Iran, which is very, very scary.
But the question is, what is the plan, given the fact that you have this brotherhood that is possibly forming? What is the plan by those who are in opposition to this?
Well, I mean, the problem is, it's like what happened in Iran when Iran fell and there was a revolution and the United States had no idea this was happening. In a way, the American government has unleashed this to a certain extent, because what happened with Mubarak was a friend of the United States. Now, he was not a good person. He's a really bad person. He repressed the people. He was a dictator and all of that. But he was, I hate to say it, a friend of the U.S. who kept that borderline quiet and honored that treaty. Now, I mean, I'm not advocating Mubarak-style politics, but the problem is, when you transition, when you throw the leader under the bus and then you start transitioning, where's the transition to the institutions of democracy that you require in order to implement a real democracy? You don't have that. We've gone too many steps too fast to the Brotherhood. The military is in power right now. Are we going to have bloodshed in the streets? Is the military going to step back and let the Brotherhood take power? I don't know that we really, in America, American government can control it. I don't think America is in a position right now to control what is happening in the Middle East. They certainly are not influencing what's going on in Iran. Iran is going nuclear, and they're not influencing it. They're sending the Turkish leader to Iran to talk to the Iranians, but they're not producing anything tangible. So the region is really deteriorating and is becoming very violent and very dangerous. And American diplomacy is really not working. So if you're asking me how we're stopping it, I think it's a flood. I don't think it's going to change. I think the Brotherhood will eventually take power. And then the question is, how does the United States leverage that? And they're ideological. So I don't think they're going to say, give us more money and give us more aid. I think that cutoff of that aid is not going to do the job. because they'll get some aid from Iran or from other countries. So American leverage over these events is really very limited and a scary situation.
And we'll take a look at, of course, we'll bring you back and you'll
Yes,
analyze
I
this a
look
little
forward
bit more.
to it.
All righty, Mark Myra's here with us, and you can catch him every month here on Open. And we want to tell you, coming up right after the break, we want to take another look in another direction. Senator Gustavo Rivera will be joining us next. He'll discuss how he is urging the Senate to drop a New York stand your ground bill. That's coming up next, coming up right after this.
Hello, Bronx family. I'm Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. Last year, I launched the Bronx Can Health Initiative, and this year, we're expanding the Can Initiative with a partnership with BronxNet. Each month, Bronx Can on BronxNet highlights a specific health issue, and this month, we are focused on colorectal cancer. Colon cancer is the third leading cause of cancer deaths in both men and women, and is the second most commonly diagnosed cancer death amongst Hispanic women.
How's everything?
According to a recent report by the American Cancer Society, right here in the Bronx, 56% of the colorectal cancers are detected at a later stage when it is much more difficult to be treated. In the Bronx, an estimated 607 cases of colon cancer will occur and result in 219 deaths. About half of these deaths can be prevented if everyone aged 50 and older is just get screened. The American Cancer Society strongly recommends that colon cancer screening begins at age 50 or even earlier if there is a family history.
Low-fat cheese sandwiches on whole wheat bread. Chewy and good for you. Snacks high in calcium help build strong bones, and foods rich in fiber are good for your heart. So you have the power to dominate. Can your food do that? Run, throw, think, eat better. Find out more at smallstep.gov.
Separate raw meats from other foods by using different cutting boards. 3,000 Americans will die from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
Well, it is the case that's captured the headlines all over the country, the Trayvon Martin shooting. Many are up in arms over the inaction of the Florida Police Department to not only arrest George Zimmerman, but that the Stand Your Ground legislation is being used to defend the shooting of a teenager later to be found unarmed. New York State Senator Gustavo Rivera and his Democratic colleagues have come together to send a letter to a senator in upstate New York urging him to drop a proposed New York Stand Your Ground legislation. Senator Rivera now joins us, and we welcome you to the show, and good to have you again.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. And so we have the senator that's coming out of Niagara Falls, and he has proposing this Stand Your Ground legislation. Of course, just the news of it itself, given the fact of what's going on in Florida, is disturbing. And many people are asking the question, why now? But more importantly, you're saying that this should be dropped altogether.
It absolutely should be dropped altogether. The name of the senator is Senator George Maziarz from upstate New York. And last week, 23 of my Senate colleagues and myself sent a letter to him asking him to withdraw the legislation that exists right now. It is a Stand Your Ground legislation that has the same language as the Florida bill that made it possible for police officers to walk away from a crime scene without arresting someone who had just killed Trayvon Martin. The person that did that, George Zimmerman, is still to this day not arrested, has not been charged with anything, and it is based on this law. Because the law states that if you feel threatened and you think that you might be in mortal danger, then you are justified to take action, which might even lead to death, which is precisely what happened in the Trayvon Martin case. This is a law that, this is a bill that exists right now in the state of New York that George Maziarz introduced. We're asking him to take it out of commission, to pull it back, because we don't think that this is something that exists, that should exist in New York State or anywhere else in the country.
The question that many people are having is the timing of it. Was it actually enacted before the Trayvon Martin case, or did this come after?
Well, this is not, first of all, this is not an enacted law. It is only a bill.
Well, I should say proposed.
Yes,
Let me say
proposed,
proposed,
yes.
but wrong word.
So it has been proposed. It existed. It was on the books as something he introduced before the Trayvon Martin tragedy. So it was one. There is thousands of pieces of legislation that get introduced every year, and we were honestly unaware that this was something that had happened in New York State. It was just introduced only in the Senate. It has not been introduced in the Assembly, and we're asking Senator Maziarz to pull it back, to completely get rid of it, because we don't believe, again, that this is good policy. We believe that it would lead specifically to the type of tragedy that we saw in Florida, where somebody shot an unarmed teenager and then felt justified, said that he felt threatened, and then the police officers didn't even arrest him. We can't have that sort of situation happen.
So where does it go from here? Because actually the legislation is proposed. Where's it going now? Where's the process? Walk us through it.
Well, what would happen now? We're asking Senator Maziarz to pull it back. Now, I should mention something that your viewers might not be aware of. There is an organization. It's a national organization called the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, A-L-E-C. And what this does, they paint themselves as a nonpartisan conservative, a nonpartisan think tank, policy think tank. And what they do, they're a very conservative group that is funded by corporate America and the NRA, and in this case, the Stand Your Ground legislation. It was a piece of legislation that was a project from ALEC. What they do is they go to different state legislatures, they find conservative legislators, and they say, hey, could you introduce this here? Could you introduce this here? And they go from Florida to Mississippi to Arizona to New York, and they find legislators and they say, could you introduce this at the state level? Some people say that the states are the laboratories of the Constitution. They're the place where sometimes legislation happens that may potentially be a national piece of legislation. This is exactly what ALEC is trying to do. And in this case, what we're saying is this is not good for anywhere in the country, and it's certainly not good for New York. And we want Senator Maziarz to take this legislation back, to deintroduce it, to take it back.
And if he doesn't?
If he doesn't, we're going to continue to talk about it. We'll talk to him personally. We'll bring attention to the matter. It is obvious that this is not a legislation that leads to positive results. In Florida, you had a man that shot an unarmed teenager, then claimed to have been attacked and feel threatened, and therefore felt justified in taking the actions that he took, and to this day has not been arrested. We cannot. This is racial profiling gone nuts. Because it goes to incredible extremes where you have private citizens feeling that they can take law into their own hands when they feel threatened. And what we see here is that the impact that this can have on communities of color is incredible. In this case, you have a young, unarmed black teen that has a hoodie on. And based on this idea that he is threatening because he's wearing a hoodie, therefore he felt justified in taking the action. And the police said, you know what, it's fine. We don't even need to arrest you. And because this law exists in the books, we cannot allow that to happen. We need to make sure that this law does not come to New York, and we will stop it. We will make sure that it does not come to New York, and we will speak about it continuously so that in other states in the nation that it already exists, we can make sure to get rid of it there.
I want to talk about racial profiling in another regard, because when it comes to the issue of redistricting, it's already occurred here in New York State. Bring us up to speed with this, because redistricting was something that was actually once talked about, now is a reality. Give us an update as to where we are and what could possibly be done.
Well, as your viewers might know, every 10 years there is a census, and based on those census numbers, districts are redrawn, and this is based on this is supposed to be based on population shifts when people move from one place to another, and sometimes so that the district lines can be drawn based on these populations. Unfortunately, in the state of New York, this process is driven by politics. It is not driven by a policy process or a process that is non-political. So in the case of New York, a couple of weeks ago, some lines were approved and signed by the governor that are frankly violations of the Voting Rights Act, that disenfranchise minority communities all across the state, because they take communities and they split them apart, or they pack them into districts.
And we're seeing a map. That's what I was going to say. We're seeing a map right here. So give us a breakdown right here, so that way people can get a little bit better of an idea.
So if there's a way to get one that is a little bit closer to the city, your watchers, your viewers can get a sense of what happened with the state lines. These, I believe, are congressional lines, but the state lines are the problem. The problem is that they were driven by a political process where people that are already elected are trying to continue to be elected, as opposed to it being done by an independent process. So the governor signed these lines. He said he was going to veto any plan that was political. I am incredibly disappointed in the governor that he made this act. It is unfortunate that I thought that he was a man of his word, and unfortunately he is not. What this plan does is that it violates the Voting Rights Act by disenfranchising minority communities all across the state. Just to give an example, in Long Island, which I think is the most egregious one, you have a series of towns and villages that have grown over the last 10 or 20 years, particularly with African American and Latino voters. So instead of creating districts where these populations would have the opportunity to elect someone of their own choosing, you instead split them up into different districts so that they don't correspond to a percentage enough in those districts where they can potentially elect somebody different than the person that is there now. That is a problem. It is a violation of the Voting Rights Act, and we believe that the Department of Justice, which has to pre-clear these lines, it is right now in their hands, and I don't believe that they're going to approve it. And finally, the Republicans in the Senate, the chamber that I sit in, added a 63rd seat. Currently, there's only 62 senators. They added a 63rd one. And they added that district in a part of the state that has lost population, and in a district, and it's a district that's overwhelmingly white, further weakening the power of minority communities all across the state. And we're challenging the constitutionality of that district in the state of New York. And we hope, and we feel very strongly, that the courts will actually overturn this plan, either the Department of Justice in the federal government, or here, the courts in the state of New York.
So it is in the court system right now?
Yes, it is. And we feel strongly that ultimately this plan will not be the final lines. Because again, the problem is when you have a process that is done by people who want to keep their seats. See, I believe that voters should be picking us. We should not be picking who our voters are. Because what happens is that they gerrymander. Your viewers might want to look that word up, and there's a movie called Gerrymandering, which is a documentary that goes through this. What you do sometimes is that you take a line and you take a block out that might have somebody who you want not to run against you. That should not be the case. It should not be driven by what the political needs of current electeds are. It should be driven by the needs of the communities of interest that are all across the state. And what this process did is it weakens them politically. And I believe it is not a right process, and hopefully the courts or the Department of Justice will overturn this plan.
Bronx, I'd say with the fact that it is in the court system, what can they still do at this stage in the game?
The unfortunate reality is that the process does not have a lot of places where people can include themselves in the process. At this point, it is in the hands of the Department of Justice, and it is in the department, and it is in the hands of the courts. What your viewers can do is that they can educate themselves on the process so that they can demand that this process be changed, whether it be to their elected officials here in the Bronx, or to the governor, who I believe, again, unfortunately, is not a man of his word, because he gave his word that he would not sign lines that were partisan or political, and that's exactly what he did. And unfortunately, it's a plan that he signed, which violates the Voting Rights Act and weakens political power of minority communities across the state of New York.
Senator Gustavo Rivera, thank you so much for coming here and sharing with us, and of course we'll continue to follow this as it goes down.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All righty, Senator Gustavo Rivera with us in the studio. We want to tell you, stay with us because we got to take a quick break, but coming up after the break, find out how the city is increasing clinical services and reproductive health services available to all Bronx teens. That's coming up when we return right after this.
How you doing?
Hi.
Hi. Have a nice day.
You too.
Thanks.
If only child abuse were this easy to recognize. If you even suspect abuse, call 1-800-4-A-CHILD. All calls are anonymous and confidential. Trust your instincts.
How you doing? I just want regular, no sugar today.
You got it.
Thanks. Hello.
Hi.
Did you eat that whole thing today?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Hi, how you doing?
She's getting big, huh?
Good. Yeah, she is big. Great haircut.
Yeah.
Yeah, looks cute. Come on, let's go. Nice to see you. Thanks a lot.
If only child abuse were this easy to recognize. If you even suspect abuse, call 1-800-4-A-CHILD. All calls are anonymous and confidential. Trust your instincts.
Hi, I'm Sean Johnson of the 2008 U.S. Gymnastics team. I'm here with our friends from VeggieTales to say, be a player, get up and play an hour a day.
Besides gymnastics, how do you stay in great shape, Sean?
I love to dance and rollerblade.
Cool.
You don't have to be an Olympian to be a player. Just do the things you already love to do, like jump rope, ride a bike, or even play freeze tag.
Now that's something to flip for.
Well done! For fun ways to get healthy, visit www.smallstep.gov.
Hey, how's it going?
Sir, are you okay?
What? Oh, this? It's probably nothing. I'm sure it'll go away.
Go away? But, sir, that can't be good.
No, it's cool. Really.
Do you want a napkin or something?
Everything's fine. Thanks.
You wouldn't ignore this. So why ignore the signs of a stroke? At the first warning signs, call 911 immediately. Because time lost is brain lost.
And welcome back to Open. The New York City Health Department has kicked off a community-wide effort, and that effort is to help Bronx teens make better decisions on sexual and reproductive health. The initiative, called Bronx Teens Connection, will help create an environment where teens will have the information, skills, and resources necessary to avoid pregnancy as well as sexually transmitted diseases. Commissioner and Medical Director of the Bronx District Public Health Office, Dr. Jane Bedell, joins us now on the show, and thank you so much for joining us here.
Thanks for inviting me.
So when you do talk about teens and sexual activity, some people say, it's a little bit of a scary, touchy topic, but many teens are sexually active.
Many teens are sexually active. About half of teens have ever been sexually active, and at any time, about a third are currently sexually active. So it's a reality, it's a fact of life, and as the Chancellor says, we're going to have to accept that reality and work with that reality.
Talk with us about this proactive effort here.
So the New York City Health Department has been working for many years around the issue of unintended teen pregnancy, and recently the Centers for Disease Control, the federal agency, decided we were doing some really good work and gave us some extra funding to continue it and to do it a little bit more deeply. And with that funding and with the New York City Health Department dollars, we're able to do a program that we think really knits together all the right pillars that you need in order to help teenagers get the skills and the resources that they need to make the choices that they can. Right now we know that about 90% of teen pregnancies are unintended. The teens didn't want to get pregnant in that moment, but they did. So how can we help them before it happens to make better choices? And that's really what the program's all about.
So here we are with Teen Connections, and we want to talk about Teen Connections. It's an environment where teens do have information, skills, as well as resources that are going to be necessary. And when you talk about those resources that are available, what are some of the resources the teens have?
So we're working and partnering with different organizations within the Bronx, particularly the South Bronx, and then some citywide agencies like the Department of Education, a really close partner of ours, ACS, Children's Services,